What is up, and welcome to Bruin Bible, episode 16. We are joined on Tuesday by Miss Thuc Nhi Nguyen once again. Thuc Nhi was at the Arizona State game, I believe, this past weekend. An unfortunate loss for the Bruins. It was a tough one. 42-23, they went down to the Sun Devils. Back-to-back home losses. Thuc Nhi, describe to me, kind of the feeling inside the Rose Bowl and ultimately what was going wrong for the Bruins on Saturday night.
Well, the last time we talked, it was after they beat LSU. So I would say this loss was like a 180 from that win in terms of excitement around the program now. Like you mentioned, UCLA's lost twice at home to Fresno State and Arizona State. So I think there are feelings around UCLA fans saying oh, it's these guys again. You got our hopes up. We thought this team was going to be different, and it's the same guys. So I think there's definitely a change of emotions around what's happening in Westwood right now. And for the Arizona State game specifically, I mean, they had some really poor defensive gaffes that just led to these huge plays that really killed them. And just the offense in the second half, it was just nothing.
Yeah.
Literally nothing, because they scored 0 points in the second half. So, I mean, it was very strange to see a performance that was so stark from first half to the second half for that offense, especially because that's kind of been UCLA's good thing under Chip Kelly.
Yeah.
So now that they are heading to Arizona this week, they have a lot of things to figure out and get back on track against a team that's not quite as good as Arizona State. So they'll have a chance to clean things up if they really focus.
Yeah, and I think you're being generous to University of Arizona. Not quite good as Arizona State. I don't think they're as good as any Pac-12 team. They are probably the black sheep of the Pac-12 football group right now. Lost to NAU this year. But let's touch back on that UCLA defense that just caused, so many open plays for Arizona State. You're feeling pretty good about, UCLA's chances. They scored a touchdown with Bruin early in the second quarter to go up 17-10. And honestly, after that play, it felt like the whole game switched. Ricky Pearsall, this guy had 2 touchdown catches of 65 and 54 yards. I mean, he was unstoppable. But the one play, it's just kind of inexcusable. The first touchdown he had, he caught a screen pass and then just proceeded to outrun the entire defense to the end zone. It was just a play that I think good defenses make. Maybe you can let them get a first down or something like that. But 65 yards off of a screen play, boy, I thought that was just not great sign to start things off. Here's the stat that I saw. The big plays were just way too much for UCLA. And granted, Churchwell and Quentin Lake didn't really play a whole lot of that game. They were using a walk-on.
Yeah.
With Alex Johnson back there in the secondary doing some things. But, I mean, their top 3 receivers were Pearsall, Hodges, and Porter. They all had plays over 47 yards or more, including Pearsall that had, 2 of those plays as such. And then the running back, Rashad White, had that 49-yard touchdown run. The defense, I mean, we were so excited about the defense, Thuc Nhi. When we talked after the LSU game, we're going, this defense, this is going to change everything. The Pac-12 better watch out. UCLA finally has a defense. And you're totally right. I feel like we're just being duped again into kind of believing that this is, Chip Kelly's team. We were really excited about this year coming in, and I know we are still 3-2, and I do believe we're bowl bound. I do want to say that off the record. On the record, I do think we're going to get to maybe 7 or 8 wins. I think that's a reasonable response. But boy, I mean, they were allowing almost a first down every play to Arizona State.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was about 9 yards a pop.
It was brutal.
Yeah, I think something someone brought up during the preseason, another reporter, while we were kind of on the field, was UCLA has experience, obviously, and that's kind of the big thing that they're touting, especially on defense. But just having the same guys back doesn't always mean they're going to be good, because what if those guys are just bad? You know, they're still the same bad guys. And I'm not saying UCLA's defensive players are bad. I mean, I think they do have some talent there. I think Quentin Lake is a very good player. I think the linebacker additions, Jordan Genmark-Heath and Ali Cajo, are really good. I think Caleb Johnson as a linebacker is a really good addition. I think Mitchell Agude is a very good kind of – he just makes plays in the backfield. So I think they have good pieces, but, you know, the more you look at a team and say, we're going to wait for them to get better and wait for them to get better, and they still don't get better, maybe they're like – they've reached their better point, you know, maybe that's it for them. I think those 4 plays were obviously very glaring. But I feel like for the most part, that hasn't been a overly large concern for this defense. They don't give up a ton of those plays all the time. Not like, I remember there was a year in the Jim Mora time when they were just giving up plays like that every single game. And I feel like this is not quite the same for this defense. Maybe they are just kind of scrambling a little bit with the safety issue with Quentin Lake and Kenny Churchwell out. So they'll have to figure that out this week, and whether how Quentin Lake and Kenny Churchwell feel getting them back on the field, because obviously UCLA needs them really bad. So I think those are definitely huge concerns for that particular game, but I'm not sure if they are huge, like this is part of the identity of this defense. But, you know, if it happens, if it pops up a little bit against Arizona, if it pops up a little bit against Washington, then like you'll kind of start seeing it turn into a pattern. But I don't really see it much as a pattern right now, at least not to that level, to that extent. I mean, those plays were giant mistakes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And to their credit, Jaden Daniels is a very, very good quarterback. He's going to make plays. You have to plan on that. I was expecting a shootout, and it was that. It's just unfortunately UCLA's offense ran out of gas. 8 penalties for 89 yards. You know, the 4th down attempt in the red zone that they did not convert. Boy, you could feel the momentum just completely change after that. I mean, you had Arizona State in the end zone. They complete a pass to Hodges for 47 yards downfield, get out of the end zone. Once that happened, it was just like, oh, like this game is, you know, in doubt now for UCLA. When in first half, you're feeling really good about that. You know, things were rolling their way, and it's a tough one. And I think if you look at the schedule, which we will do later in this episode, you know, this is one they could have easily won. I feel like they could have won against Fresno State. The defense let them down on that as well. No disrespect to Jake Haener. I mean, this guy is one of the better quarterbacks in the country. But
yeah, great game by Jake Haener. That was a great game. The Fresno State game was very exciting.
Were you at that game?
Yes, I was.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, I was watching that. I actually do production for the Pac-12 studio, so we're all watching that game. Haener couldn't even walk and led them down like a 75-yard touchdown drive. I mean, it was just something out of a movie almost. I think Disney needs to get the right for the Jake Haener movie on that play. But, boy,
I mean, being a UW alum, seeing Jake Haener, who transferred from UW to Fresno State, I was like, really? But yeah, great game. That was a really fun game to be at, even though it was like 2 a.m.
We would love, I mean, UW would love to have Haener back there. I think most Pac-12 schools would be very content if Jake Haener was their quarterback. But, you know, we're going to move on to some positives. I feel like there are some positives and negatives to, you know, the UCLA game that we just saw in the season as a whole. One of the positives, Thuc Nhi, I wanted to talk about, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I think as a whole, has been, you know, pretty solid. I think when you really break it down, he still made a couple mistakes here and there. 10 touchdowns to 1 interception. He's only thrown 1 interception this year. We can usually count on, you know, one of those a game, you know, one of those kind of boneheaded throws he would have in each and every game. But, boy, I mean, that Stanford game last week, what a gutsy performance he had to kind of get them out of the hole there. Came back on the field, delivered the game-sealing touchdown to Kyle Phillips. And, for the most part, he played pretty well, I think, against Arizona State. Granted, the offense had its issues, but a lot of those penalties were not on him. I think maybe the play call at the end for the 4th and 1 could have been handled better. But when you break it down, played turnover-free football, 235 yards through the air. And the real key one for me is that they are starting to run the football with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. He has actually been outstanding with that recently. He only had 35 yards rushing, I think, in the first 2 games combined. 19 carries for 96 yards. He had that very cool formation play that I saw in your article that you talked about as well, where they split everyone out wide, and he just took it up the middle for 35 yards. Getting him involved in this run game when you have guys like Charbonnet and Britton Brown already, I think that bodes well for what this offense can do moving forward, because that's just another dynamic to really game plan for. It's like, well, we got to stop Charbonnet and Brown, but boy, Thompson-Robinson, you don't want to let this guy run either.
Yeah, I mean, I will say UCLA didn't need Dorian to run those first 2 games because they had Zach Charbonnet doing whatever he wanted. So if they can get Zach Charbonnet to run the way he did those first 2 games, like Dorian's happy to have like 0 rushing yards. That's fine. He's happy with that. But Dorian has been really solid this season so far. A few little mistakes, but obviously not as glaring as in previous years, throwing interceptions and stuff. He did have that one fumble where it just like fell out of his hand. But I mean, I remember in one of the Cincinnati games, he had like 2 of those. The random fumble. So he's really improved. And I'm really impressed by his moxie, not just in that Stanford game, but just this whole season. I mean, when you think about all of the stuff that Dorian's had to kind of absorb being a quarterback at UCLA and really being pegged as the quarterback of the future, he's going to be the person to do it. It's a lot of pressure for him. And I think he's folded under at certain times. And I'm also one of the people who have been critical of Dorian, but he's been very solid this year, which is exactly what the team needs. I think that 4th down call, it was an RPO, and he said after the game, I read it this way, but I should have just given it to Zach. Like, why he's one of the best running backs in the country. I believe that. I should have given it to him. And I really respected that kind of candor from him. So I think he's grown up a lot. I'm really impressed having watched his kind of progression from freshman year to now, and now he's a senior. And I think a lot of people wish it would have come faster, but he's at a really good place. And I think he's doing exactly what UCLA needs him to do, which is just be solid. Don't make mistakes. And the last time we talked, we kind of mentioned that too. Like, Dorian doesn't need to be Superman. And it's almost better if he doesn't try to be, because he has a lot of pieces around him that can make the entire offense work. And considering Chip Kelly's history of quarterbacks who are not stars themselves, but kind of become stars because their offenses are so good, that can kind of be Dorian's growth this year. And I think he's really kind of leaned into that and done exactly what the team needs him to do. So I think he had a very good game overall, and to have that kind of passing and rushing production in the same game is really impressive.
And that's kind of like the ideal stat line you'd want from him, maybe a touchdown or 2 more from Dorian Thompson-Robinson. But overall, pretty good game, I think, from him. Granted, the RPO decision should have been going to Charbonnet. I mean, one of the better goal line running backs, not only in the Pac-12, but the entire country, just such a strong running back.
Yeah, I mean, he set the freshman touchdown record at Michigan. So, he has a nose for the end zone.
Guy is a monster, and we're grateful to have him on our team. I think that still bodes well for UCLA's future. Another guy I want to talk about that I felt like has just not been getting the ball a lot, finally did. And we talked about him after the LSU game, the local product, Greg Dulcich, finally was getting some targets. I feel like Dulcich is so talented, and, this guy is one of the better tight ends in the country. I don't think that's a stretch in the slightest, given what this guy can do week in and week out. But the last 2 games, he only had 3 catches for 45 yards combined. He had a game with no catches in that time frame as well. You got to feed the guy. I mean, if you have a weapon like Dulcich, you got to do it. They finally started to do it. 9 catches, 136 yards. Not a lot of tight ends can do that in the country. Tear off the top of a defense, give you 130 plus yards through the air. I mean, that's incredible. Dulcich is an absolute stud. I would just like to see him featured more, and we got that at least on Saturday night, which I think was a positive.
Yeah, I love that Greg Dulcich is like their deep threat guy. he even last year, I mean, he led them in like yards per reception. It was crazy. I think something about tight ends that is unique is that like sometimes the defense just dictates that it's going to be a good game for them, So maybe they just kind of came up with a favorable matchup against Arizona State that let Greg Dulcich, unleash the Greg Dulcich, if you will. And maybe that was also what happened at LSU. I mean, he didn't have a great start to the season either in their first game against Hawaii. I think he may have had one catch in that game. So I think it really just depends on the matchup. And Chip is always going to follow the matchup more than anything else. And I think maybe he does that to a detriment. Maybe that's part of his problem, that he's getting a little bit too like focused on what the other team does and not just going with what got him there on his own team. But, if UCLA is obviously thrilled to have a receiving tight end as good as Greg Dulcich. And I hope that we get to see more of him because he's a great player, and also he has great hair. Like we should be talking about that more so he can get the shampoo commercial.
Phenomenal hair. I think once he makes it to the NFL, I hate to bring this up because he's an SC guy. Troy Polamalu had the Head and Shoulders commercials. Do you remember those?
Right.
Dulcich might be next in line, I think, for the Head and Shoulders. We're starting the campaign now. Will Greg, just send us a cut, of your check that you get from Head and Shoulders. Fine with that. But like you said, I think they just need to feature him a little bit more in the offense. Grant, the Hawaii game, I think, was a blowout in the first quarter. So they're just not throwing the ball. But, I mean, Fresno State, for him not to have a catch in that game when it was very back and forth, I was just kind of blown away at that. It's just like you got this, Ferrari in the garage, and you're just not taking it out at all. Because I think, like you said, he's the deep threat at tight end. How many deep threats in the country are tight ends in general?
Right.
Like that is a very impressive thing, I think, and it shows his NFL potential, which I feel like, if he can go to the combine, run a good 40 time and do all the things, this guy could be a top 3 round pick. I mean, we've seen the recent success of UCLA tight ends, Asiasi, Caleb Wilson, guys like that. This guy might be the most talented of all of them. I mean, we saw what he did against USC last year. That is one of the all-time most memorable performances, even in a loss, that UCLA has had from the tight end position in Dulcich. 167 yards receiving, a touchdown. So just feed the man the ball. Only good things can happen when you give it to Greg Dulcich, in my opinion. So let's give it to Greg. Another guy I really want to pivot to, and I think a guy that's finally starting to get some love, not only in Westwood, but I think around the Pac-12, and I think this will probably be the first time he does make an all-Pac-12 team. Kyle Phillips has been outstanding for UCLA, and he's led the team in catches the last 2 years. He's probably going to lead it again this year, and he's never really been talked about, a little bit outside of UCLA fan bases, but Phillips has been sensational. 6 touchdowns in 5 games, doing some big things. The Stanford game, I mean, was outstanding. That long 75-yard touchdown he had when it felt like the game may have been out of reach, lined up in the slot in the red zone against Arizona State, absolutely shook his defender on a nice move in the red zone. Kyle Phillips, we got to give the man his due. 6 touchdowns in 5 games is not easy.
And he returns punts too.
Yeah, I know. He's been insane. Kyle Phillips is a guy we got to talk more about. Thuc Nhi, give me your thoughts on Mr. Phillips.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle Phillips is kind of sneaky good. He's kind of unassuming. He's not super tall. He's a very tactical route runner. And I think like Demetric Felton may have been tweeting at him over the week saying, like, complimenting how sharp his routes looked. And like, that's super inside baseball, inside football. Like, average people aren't going to be fawning over that, but that's really what separates you, especially if you're a guy like Kyle Phillips, who's not overly tall, who's not super duper fast. He's a great tactician. And I feel like UCLA has always thought that about him. I remember on his signing day, that was one of the things that Chip mentioned. Kyle Phillips is a great route runner. And even as a high school student, he showed that capability and attention to detail. And he is very sure-handed. I think UCLA and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, most importantly, trust him to catch the ball in big situations like he did against Stanford to get that game-winning touchdown. So I think one of the reasons why Kyle Phillips flies under the radar, at least the past 2 years, is because UCLA didn't win very much. So if you're not winning and you're not the quarterback, then no one's going to look at you. And if you are the quarterback and you're not winning, then people are only looking at you because they're not happy with you. So now if they can gather a little bit more momentum, obviously win some more games, Kyle Phillips will have more reason for people to look at him and talk about him, because he really does deserve it. He's having a great season, and he's really emerging as a go-to receiver that this team is missing and could really use.
I think I had my doubts about Phillips a little bit in terms of the next level, but just what I'm seeing from him now, you mentioned the route running. I think he is outstanding when it comes to route running, probably the best on the team by a long shot in that regard. I think this guy can make an NFL training camp roster from what I've seen. I mean, it's not out of the question. The little slot receiver guys, there's a place for those in the NFL. You have your Wes Welkers, Jacoby Myers, things like those guys. He fits that mold. And, if you're beating your defender by as bad as he beat him in the end zone, I think it was Pierce for Arizona State, and making plays over the middle for 75 yards at that size and that speed, this guy can make it to the next level. I'm feeling confident in Phillips. I think he's going to make all Pac-12 second team. I think that's a realistic expectation. If UCLA can get to 7 or 8 wins, which is, my prediction, I think at the end of the day. What do you think about that?
Kyle Phillips in the NFL or the –
both. Let's go both NFL and all Pac-12 second team.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it does depend on who is winning. I think if UCLA does win, then definitely. Obviously, one of the first team spots is going to go to USC's Drake London, who's just a beast. But, yeah, I mean, considering the way the Pac-12 is kind of shaking out, it's just kind of a toss-up, We'll have to see how it goes in the records. But I think in the NFL, if he finds the right fit, you can play in the NFL for a decade. It's all about the right fit when it comes to the NFL, and especially if you have if someone like him, his stature, his skill set, it's not like he'll fit everywhere, but he doesn't need to fit everywhere. He just needs that one team that does fit, So I think, especially with the way the NFL is kind of progressing in its offenses, they're faster, they're more spread out. That seems perfect for a guy like Kyle Phillips.
Kyle Phillips, the fit is all he needs. And for UCLA fans out there, I'm still a Rosen believer. I feel like he hasn't gotten the right fit. I would like to see him go to a team that believes in him and invests in him. That has not been the case just yet. But Thuc Nhi, let's go through the remaining schedule, and I want to do kind of a prediction thing. This will be the last thing we do today before we get on to University of Arizona on Saturday. They have 7 remaining games left, and they're 3-2 right now. Let's kind of go through a game-by-game prediction on if you think they can win or not. I'll start off with U of A. I think this is going to be a very easy win for UCLA. I think they're going to bounce back after a tough loss.
Yeah,
that's a way more talented team.
Yeah, that's a dub. I mean, shout out to Jedd Fisch, first-time head coach, former UCLA offensive coordinator. I think Jedd Fisch has a chance to be good, just not this year. It's tough sledding out there in Tucson right now. So, yeah, I think that's a dub for UCLA.
Could not agree more, Thuc Nhi. We wish Jedd Fisch well, just never against the Bruins. I believe he's going to be, a solid coach if he can get the right recruits in there. Not looking great right now to start, but give him a couple years. We'll see what can happen. Here's the one that I'm interested in your prediction, because they do play your UW Huskies next game. And they started off slow. Correct me if I'm wrong. They were 0-2, 0-3 to start.
Oh yeah, 0-2. 0-2.
0-2 to start. They're now 2-3, so they've won 2 of their 3 last games. A little inconsistent to start, but they seem to be kind of figuring it out. Where do you see this game going? They're going to be in Seattle, so hopefully advance for the Huskies. Where do you go?
That's I mean, I feel like both of those teams are not. I think they're just like evenly flawed, which is what you could say for a lot of teams in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the fact that UW is home might be helpful for UW, but like neither of those teams are particularly great right now. I do think UCLA has shown more potential though. So maybe UCLA is the front runner for that one right now, because like the way the offense is going for UW is just so bad. It's just very not good. So I think maybe UCLA could win that game. I think because if UCLA plays up to their potential, which they have done this year already, they could do it. I feel like UW hasn't shown that ability yet.
Yeah, they haven't shown that like top level gear that at least UCLA's had. And I think a lot of people still believe they should have won that Fresno State game. So in hindsight, they could essentially be, 4-1 right now heading into week 6. So it's tough to gauge. I think I would favor UCLA, just what we saw. I think that was a great point you had, given our run game, given our offense. But boy, if they have many more halves like we saw in the second half, it's going to be hard to favor them against anybody going forward. The next game is probably the biggest one in the Rose Bowl on the remaining schedule. We have 2 more remaining home games. Oregon Ducks, going to be a game. They just are coming off their first loss of the season. Mm-hmm. A shocker to Stanford in overtime. A team that UCLA just beat, which could make them feel good coming into this game. I think Oregon's going to have to win out the remaining schedule to even have a chance at the college football playoff. And it's going to be tough to beat them, especially with Thibodeau coming back, I believe. So, Thuc Nhi, give me your thoughts on this game.
Yeah, I'm going Oregon on that one. The Pac-12, okay. Well, I'll also say with all these predictions, like I'm writing them in very faint pencil because who the heck knows what happens in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is always going to Pac-12. That's the only thing I'm going to tell you in stone, that the Pac-12 is always going to Pac-12. So I think Oregon should win that game. And if you think that they'll have a little bit more support with guys coming back from injury, surely they'll be in better position to win. I think UCLA would be motivated to play that game, obviously, against what's perceived as the best team in the Pac-12. So they'll, I'm sure, kind of be excited and they'll bring their best effort. So I don't think it's going to necessarily be a blowout, but I do think Oregon should win that game.
I agree. I think the Ducks should rightly be favored. But UCLA, I mean, we've seen some of the big games they've had. LSU game stands out. If that defense can somehow find its footing from earlier in the year, I mean, maybe we can get ourselves a game there, which would be fun. Rose Bowl. Boy, by the way, the lights that the Rose Bowl does when they score a touchdown, one of the coolest things I've seen in all of college football, the way those lights just like kind of go off. Like it's kind of like a delayed strobe light. I don't know how to really describe it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. I've seen a lot of those lights. Yeah, I mean, I think they're cool to an extent. I feel like there's just a lot of them. And if you're sitting there for a long time, it's just like, what is happening? But also, if you play a day game, what are you going to do? They don't have the same effect if the sun is out.
I think you can only do them for night games. Yeah. I think that would be my theory on it. But it's just kind of cool to see that. I've only seen that with the Baltimore Ravens of all teams. They were the only team I've seen it. But cool addition to the Rose Bowl. I don't know if Martin Jarman's responsible for that or somebody else, but I'm in support of it. I think it's awesome. Maybe a little disoriented, but I think the cool factor is definitely there. Here's a team that's really fallen off for the next game. They're going to be traveling to Salt Lake City. I think a lot of us expected Utah to be much better. Kyle Whittingham usually puts together very tough, hard-hitting teams that are very consistent, don't beat themselves up. It's kind of been the opposite of that this year. Just have not been a great football team so far. But, a lot can change in a couple of weeks. Like you said, the Pac-12 going to Pac-12.
Yeah.
Do they go into Salt Lake City, and do you see this being a tough matchup?
I think it's hard to know. We don't know much about Utah. I mean, they didn't play last week. The week before, they beat Washington State, which is, it's really that difficult, especially in their current, form. Washington State's got some problems. But, they lost to San Diego State in overtime. San Diego State's pretty good. They're 25 right now, I think.
Yeah.
They lost to BYU the week before. BYU is very good. First week they beat Weber State. So there's really not a lot of data on what Utah's going to do. I also know that they're mourning the loss of one of their own players. So we don't know how that's going to emotionally affect them. Maybe it's going to keep them hyper-focused and motivated and unified for the rest of the year, and they're going to come out guns blazing. We don't know if it's going to kind of emotionally wreck them. And either way is completely understandable with what they're going through. It's extremely difficult considering that they lost a teammate this year and last year. So I don't know what to make of Utah. And so I can't really say what's going to happen in that game.
Yeah, our thoughts and prayers with the family of Aaron Lowe, too. That was such just a terrible story to wake up to after a day of college. I believe it happened on a Sunday after college football. Mm-hmm. So it was just an after-game incident. Something happened and transpired. Just terrible to hear about. I think that game is going to be a little tougher than expected. I think this bye week could really benefit Utah if they're able to kind of get back into Whittingham's ways. Not a guy that loses a lot. So I think it's fair to say that he can get that program back on track. I mean, hell, Stanford started off the year looking awful, and now they might be the favorites to win the Pac-12 North if they win out because they have that advantage over Oregon now. So
isn't that classic Stanford, though? They start poorly, and you're like, oh, this is going to be the year that they suck. But nope, it never is.
Never is. Rebound. David Shaw, man, that guy is a hell of a coach. He always figures it out, but boy, if you can clear up those slow starts, they might be top 10 or something like that. It's crazy to think about. Next game I got for you is Colorado. Maybe outside of Arizona, the worst offense in the Pac-12. USC beat the brakes off them last week, and USC is going through it right now. Mm-hmm. I feel very confident in that game. I think that is a dub for UCLA. What do you think, Thuc Nhi?
Yep. Yeah, I think so too. And they're at home at the Rose Bowl. It should be an easy win for UCLA.
The next game I got for you is the big crosstown showdown between SC. It is at the Coliseum. So you will be traveling there. I'm actually going to be trying to go down to that game. So hopefully I'm able to see you up in the press box and say hello. But with SC, this game, I think, let's say if Chip Kelly drops one of those games we think he can win. Let's say he loses to Washington, Oregon, or Utah maybe as well, and they go in there and they lose to USC in maybe an embarrassing factor. I think that would be a deciding factor if UCLA is going to move on from Chip Kelly or not. If we really fall apart and UCLA gets blown out against SC, I think we could really start to hear is Chip out of Westwood at that point. I don't know if it'll come to that. I think UCLA has a very good team. I know SC is going through it right now, but give me your thoughts. Do you think if they kind of struggle down the line, do you think Chip is seriously on the hot seat? I mean, he's 13-23 as a head coach for UCLA. Yeah,
of course. I mean, it's definitely something Martin Jarmond is considering. I mean, this was going to be the year for Chip. He has all of his players. He has a ton of transfers. We've been waiting for this is year 4, or people have been waiting for the bamboo to grow after 4 years. And if it's not growing, then it's not happening, Yeah. And I think maybe last year was kind of a mulligan situation just because the COVID pandemic, all this crazy stuff. So if he can't do it this year, then when is he going to do it? So if it does come to that, if they completely tank for the rest of the year, then that's something that Martin Jarmond is going to have to evaluate. But I mean, if you look at the SC game, sometimes SC has like an overwhelming talent advantage. I don't think it's as overwhelming as it has been in recent years. And so when I was walking out of the Rose Bowl on Saturday, it was like 1 a.m. I was thinking about this game, and like I was talking to another reporter about how I think like this UCLA USC game is going to be like the one in 2018, I think, when both of the teams had like losing records. It was like the losingest combined record of the two teams when they met. And I feel like that this matchup is going to be like that too. Like both of these teams, when they come in, are not going to be good. But I think Chip has shown an ability to like outcoach other coaches, especially in big games. Like he won that first USC game in 2018. They were bad that year, but they won that USC game. So I think even if both of the teams are really bad heading into that rivalry game, I would say UCLA has a legitimate chance to win.
Oh, definitely. I mean, they blew the game last year. I mean, they were up final possession, last kickoff return. USC nearly takes it to the middle of the field. Couple first downs for SC, game-winning field goal, SC wins. So, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Chip is going to be scheming against a team that, let's face it, probably has a lot of players that have 1 foot in, 1 foot out, thinking like, hey, I'm talented. There's a lot of 4-star, 5-star guys there. We don't know who the next coach is going to be. We don't know he's going to believe in me. I might be transferring at the year's end, so I don't know what's going to happen. So I think that's a reasonable, assumption. I think UCLA, if Chip Kelly wants to keep his job, needs a win against SC and a couple wins down the stretch. I'm not saying he's going to beat Oregon or anything like that, but if they can beat SC, maybe get to 8 wins, I think that's a respectable year. Maybe not as high as we had hoped for, but 8 wins, I mean, that's solid for what Chip has done through his first 3 years. Mm-hmm. The last game of the year is Cal. By the way, is Chase Garbers and Ethan Garbers, they're related.
Brothers. They're brothers.
Yeah, I figured. That'll be fun. Chase Garbers is one of those players in the Pac-12 where it feels like they've played 7 years of Pac-12 football.
Oh, yeah.
He's just been there forever. It's such a weird coincidence with that. Didn't even know that Ethan and Chase were – I knew there was some connection. I didn't know they were literal brothers.
Yes.
What do you think about this? Do they close out on a W and maybe get some momentum going into bowl season?
I think so. Cal is not – I mean, Cal just lost to Washington State. They did, however, beat UW in overtime. Oh, no, they lost to UW in overtime.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, I think they do. I think they beat Cal. I think Justin Wilcox is a good coach. He was the defensive coordinator at UW when I was a student there, and I thought like his defenses were really great. And you can kind of see his fingerprints on Cal. They always have a very stout defense, a very disciplined defense, but they just need to figure out that offense, And once they do, I think they'll be a really formidable Pac-12 team. But I just don't know if this is the year yet that they do that. And it's kind of been a long time for them to figure that out. They've kind of had the same problem for a while. So I think UCLA gets that Cal game, and they'll end 7 to 9-ish win area. 9 wins would be really good. But I think going into the year, I looked at them as like 8 wins as the most. Like that would be a ceiling for them. And I think they teased everyone with that LSU game. But then as the season's kind of unfolded a little bit more, it's kind of one of those like, oh, you are who you thought you were. You're gonna top out at about 7-8 wins. So, I mean, that could be the first winning record at UCLA under Chip Kelly. So I guess that's a slight bit of improvement, probably not as much improvement as US or UCLA fans would be hoping for, though.
I agree. I think 8 wins is kind of the target I have. Are you agreeing with the 8 wins?
Yeah. I think so. That seems that seems realistic for what they've done already and what they could do in the rest of the season.
Awesome. Well, Thuc Nhi, this was an awesome Tuesday with you. We hope to have you on the Bruin Bible moving forward once again. Bruin Bible, we're out.